If you're someone who's successful, you're good at what you do. You build your business. You become an excellent doctor. You're going to have a lot of mediocres jealous of that and try to take you down because they can't do that, and it bothers them. It reflects poorly on them that they're not you.
Hey, Kent, welcome to the show. Today we got Kent Lemon, artist extraordinaire. He's been featured in Gray's Sporting Journal a bunch. Big-time hunter, big-time outdoorsman, old friend. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Seamus. Nice to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about your background as an artist and how you got to where you're at today, to where you're today?
My father was a very enthusiastic art collector. So as a young kid, I grew up surrounded by art in my house. My father was a doctor. He was a radiologist, but he was also a very accomplished painter as a pastime. He took it seriously, and he was very good at it. And as a young kid, I grew up around my dad's collection of art and his own art that he had. He always had a studio in our home, and I was kind of always the kid in elementary school who they turned to if there needed some art thing done. But I never considered that really a profession. I was always thought I was going to be a doctor, and went to school with that studying in mind, and realized after a while that I was not listening to my lectures anymore. I was drawing my fellow students and drawing the lecturer and drawing the hands. And I realized after a while, looking at my notes, that what I was doing was drawing, not taking notes for science. So I decided to not pursue a medical career and decided to become an artist. And I left CU, Colorado University, and applied to art school at Parsons School of Design, and was accepted and went to Parsons School of Design for 2 years, and didn't graduate there because it doesn't matter to get a fine arts degree for anything unless you're going to teach it. And my goal there was to learn enough techniques. I enrolled in the illustration department to basically learn technique, not learn how to be an artist, just learn how to tell a story. And when I felt like I had a good grasp on that, and I wasn't much more I was going to learn, I left Parsons and moved back to Colorado and started my fine art career with some local artists that my father had collected, and they were very generous with their time and knowledge for a young artist. And I would paint with them. I would bring them my paintings that I was doing, and they were very rudimentary. I didn't know what I was doing, but they would critique them, and they would suggest ways to improve. And over a short period of time, I improved quite a bit. And about 2 years after I started doing this, I had my first show, and it went really well. Looking back on the artwork, it was not very complicated, but it was competent, and I didn't charge very much for them, and I sold well on that.
At that time, were you heavily influenced by portraits and outdoors art, wilderness art, sportsman type art at that point, or was it?
Not at that point. I was mostly doing landscape because it was easier to do. I didn't have to worry. I didn't have to have a studio. I didn't have to have models. I just could take my outdoor painting easel and set it up anywhere and paint something. And it was, the artists that I was around were primarily landscape painters, not totally, but I eventually did figure painting. In art school, I did a great deal of figure drawing and painting, an enormous amount. So I got out of art school, I was a pretty good draftsman. I could draw pretty well. But when I started painting, I mostly did landscape, and sometimes I do landscape with animals in them, horses, cows, some occasional deer or something like that. And so there was a little of that coming, but and then I got into other stuff. I got into portraiture. For a long time, I did a lot of portraits of my friends' families' children. In fact, I think I did one of you.
Yeah, you've done a couple for us.
So yeah, I think I've done all the Mulva Hill kids when they were little, and a bunch of our friends, mutual friends. I've painted a lot of people's kids. I got kind of a little niche business painting children's portraits, and I thought I was pretty good at that. My little thing was doing them outdoors. I liked the sunlight on portraits, so I did very little of that where I had someone indoors in a studio setting.
So growing up in Colorado, you're a pretty serious, accomplished outdoorsman at this point. Were you involved in that community at a young age, or is that something you got into in your older years?
My father, when I was younger, we were, I got into guns. I got into shooting. I really liked. I'd like to just take my dad's guns out and drive somewhere where there weren't any people and shoot bottles and shoot cans and shoot wood and shoot just run some bullets through the guns. That was fun. And my dad took me hunting, infrequently. Occasionally we'd go, hunt for rabbits, hunt for small game. And, I wasn't really a hunter until I met my wife, whose sister married a guy who was a big hunter. He grew up in Pennsylvania in a prison. His father was the warden of this prison outside of Harrisburg, and the prison was on 300 or 400 acres of land. And the actual prison was very small, but the prison land was big, and it was full of pheasants and deer. And my brother-in-law really was into hunting. He grew up doing that. And so when I met him, he said, "Hey, you want to go deer hunting? It's kind of deer season in Pennsylvania." I'm like, "I don't know. I've never shot a deer. Don't know if I want to shoot a deer." And anyway, we ended up deer hunting. I went insane for deer hunting. I thought that was the most fun thing I've ever done. And at the time, I was living in New York City, and my wife and I would travel back to the Harrisburg area, and I would hunt with my brother-in-law and some of his friends that were still in the area, and they got me into ruffed grouse hunting, deer hunting. Both my brother-in-law, one of the guys that we hunted with, turned to bow hunting, so we said we should try that. That seems really fun. So then we all became bow hunters, and we stopped rifle hunting, and we killed deer with bows now. And that just once I met my brother-in-law, who was really into all that, he was the one when I was about 22 that really got me into hunting. And I took it further than he did. We still hunt together, but I went nuts. When I moved back to Colorado, that's all I could think about.
You've been up to Alaska. You've done pretty much everything in the stateside you can do.
Yeah, I've hunted pretty much everything you can hunt in the lower 48, and I took a trip with another brother-in-law, my sister's husband, to Alaska for a caribou hunt, and I'd love to do that again. That was one of the hunts of a lifetime. We took a float plane in 300 miles into over the Taylor Pass, over the huge mountains into the central Alaska, and they just dropped us off and said, "See you in a week if we can get in." They tell you that you might be stuck there for a long time if they can't get the planes over that pass with weather. You just have to suck it up until they can get through. So we ended up, we were a couple of days late because we couldn't fly in, and we were a couple of days late coming out because they couldn't. You kind of wait by the lake, and if the plane shows up, you load your stuff on and leave. If it doesn't show up, you go hunt that day and try again tomorrow. So, that was fun. I've never hunted outside the U.S., but I'd love to go to Africa. I'm kind of having that as a bucket list thing to do, is do one African hunt before I go.
Absolutely. So we were prepping for this podcast about arts and culture. You're pretty well read on politics, history, arts, and culture. What was the political publication you used to do cartoons for a long time?
It was the Weekly Standard out of Washington, D.C., and I had a writer friend of mine who used to edit the Rocky Mountain News editorial page, a guy named Dave Shiflett, great guy, really good writer, really funny. And he had moved from Denver back to Virginia, and he said, "Hey, this guy named Rupert Murdoch," and I didn't know who Rupert Murdoch was at the time, and said he's starting up this, kind of conservative political magazine, and they haven't hired anybody. They don't, it's brand new. You should send them stuff. And it's like, well, I'm not, I went to school for illustration, but I've never been an illustrator. I've never worked for anybody. I was a fine artist up to that point. And anyway, I sat down. I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll send him some stuff. What the heck?" Because I was a decent caricaturist, and that was what I was going to show him. And I sat down, and I wanted to make sure my style didn't look anything like anyone else's style. And the problem is that at the time was a caricaturist named David Levine, he was so good and so popular that everybody copied him. There was like every caricaturist had some kind of David Levine influence, and it showed. And I was like, man. So I took pen and ink off the table, because that's David Levine's medium, and I started thinking about it. It's like, well, I'm a painter, so what I should do is try to make my illustrations, my caricatures, kind of look like paintings. So it was going to be published mostly in black and white, so I wasn't going to use paint. So I pulled some watercolor brushes out and some ink, just regular India ink, and got some watercolor paper out, and basically just painted a black and white watercolor. And I wanted it really dashy looking. I didn't want it teased out and, overworked. I wanted a really breezy look to my stuff. And anyway, I started screwing around with, how to do this, and got some pictures of famous people and started trying to do this. And pretty quickly I developed a style that I really liked. It was very dashy, and for anybody who's interested, I guess you could look that up and find some examples of my work. But it ended up being really a lucrative, really fun thing to do. I sent the art director examples that I'd done, and he said, "Hell yeah, we'll use you." And pretty soon after that, it's a funny story. I was actually elk hunting in the Colorado Rockies, but I was staying at a friend of mine's house as a base camp, and I actually got a phone call while I was elk hunting and said, "Hey, we need you to do one for us." And I'm like, man, I'm in the middle of the mountains. And my brother-in-law was like, "Don't say no." He said, "You can't say no. This is the first one. You got to do this." So we jumped in my car and drove into the nearest town, and I found some kind of art store where I could get a brush and some ink and some paper. And I used the local library and dashed this thing off and stuck it in the FedEx up there, and FedEx that first drawing to him from Silverthorne, Colorado. And then it was off to the races. I was doing work for them pretty much every week.
How many years were you doing cartoons?
I was with them for 5 years, and then they went another 2 years before they ceased publication. But the last 2 years, they really didn't use illustration anymore. I'm sure that illustration budget was big, because I was getting paid a lot of money, and the other couple of artists they used were getting paid a lot of money. And I think they figured out that they could hire a kid that knows how to do Adobe Illustrator for a lot less than me and the other guys that were doing real drawings. And so we all we never got fired. We just never got called much anymore. But through the Weekly Standard, other publications saw my work, and I started getting calls from art directors for Entertainment Weekly. Some other pretty well-known magazines would use me now and then. And someone suggested I send some of my sporting stuff that I didn't do a lot of it, but I do from my hunting trips. I do some sporting art with dogs and hunters and deer and elk and wildlife kind of stuff, and said, hey, there's this publication out of Georgia called Gray's Sporting Journal, and they publish a lot of original art. And so I sent their art director some stuff, and I started getting calls from them. Hey, we want to use this, we want to use that. It's like, sure, use whatever you want. So that's kind of, I was a fine artist who found illustration later, and most artists go the other route. They start as illustrators, and they get tired of the grind, and they get tired of being art directed, and they have the art bug in them anyway, and they become fine artists. They leave the illustration world and go to the art world, which is, I did the kind of mixed in the illustration with the fine art.
So we've talked about this before, in a time where the arts have really gone downhill. The aesthetic and the messaging is low quality. There's a lot of propaganda, a lot of leftist propaganda in the art world in the States. It's almost not art. How would you describe the arts, and what is the core of the artistic community and artistic culture? How would you describe that?
Well, let's start from the beginning. And all art through human history has been a kind of a language. It's a means of communicating. From the Altamira and Lascaux cave paintings. There's a reason those guys ventured far deep into a scary cave and spent many hours in there making art inside this cave. It was probably a spiritual thing. It could have been a religious thing for them. I don't know, but the artwork was amazing, and it was even in scale. When the viewer would look up at these cave walls, all the animals and all the people in them and everything was in scale, but if you looked at it from as if you were straight at it, it would be all out of drawing. It was in drawing for the viewer to look up at it, which was, to me, incredible. But anyway, they were communicating down through all cultures and time. People would make art for communication, to communicate with each other, to communicate with their gods, to communicate with whatever. And the better it was, the clearer the message. When the artist was very skilled and had something interesting to say, if he did it really well, everyone who saw that would understand what he was saying. And through all cultures and through all time, I mean, we still pretty much understand what those Altamira cave paintings are. I mean, thousands of years later and massive cultural shift later, it's still a powerful thing. It's a powerful piece of communication. But getting back to the idea of communication through artwork, the better the artist, the better the idea, the better the execution, the more understanding there is of what you're seeing. So there's a lot of artists who are trying to say something and they're not very good at it, so the message is garbled or the message doesn't get through at all. They're just, they don't have the aesthetic, they don't have the craftsmanship to communicate what they're trying to do. They're not good artists. And good artists do a good job of communicating. Maybe not the best, but great artists is everybody through all cultures sees great art and understands it immediately. It's a very, very good communication. So getting back to your point, I have not a theory, but I have an opinion that visual art up through the centuries, starting, kind of at the beginning of the Renaissance, when the materials were paints and canvas and brushes got better, people became more affluent. They became better educated. 14th, 15th century, coming out of the Dark Ages, there was a flourishing of this. The wealthy could afford to commission paintings from good artists, and the churches, especially the Catholic Church, could commission these amazing artists. Michelangelo, especially, probably the greatest artist who ever lived. was recognized by popes and by the people who commissioned him that he was extraordinary, and they would get his work to communicate to the illiterate people around them. I mean, you don't have to know how to read to look up at the Sistine Chapel ceiling and have a hell of a story told to you. His Pietà, the sculptures, people, you look at that and know exactly what's going on. It's a powerful communication. But as time went on, I believe, and more artists became more skilled, you get to a point, in my opinion, from the mid 1800s, about 1850 till about 1920, in my opinion, was the greatest art ever made. Paintings. The amount of good artists that formed there was just astonishing to me. And I believe it happened because these guys saw each other's work in these big shows that they would have. They were salon shows, and artists would submit the work from all over Europe, the Americas, to these shows, and the accepted works would be hung, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And people would flock to see them, and critics would come and write about them, and the artists themselves would see other artists' work and be astonished. You think you're a really good painter, and you go to one of these salon shows with Russians and Italians and Englishmen and Frenchmen and Spaniards and the Netherlands, all over the place, and you see these other artists' work that are, you thought you were good, and all of a sudden you see, wow, I mean, there's some guys here that are just over the top good. And because of that friendly competition, I'll call it, where you realize, hey man, I thought I was really good, and there's some artists in here that scare me how good they are. So your work elevates, and then the next year your work impresses them and they elevate, and everybody's, what they're trying and what they're learning and what they're seeing gets better and better and better. I'll name three of them. We spoke of this earlier, but the three artists that I consider the best is a Spaniard named Joaquin Sorolla, a Swede named Anders Zorn, and our own John Singer Sargent, who spent most of his life in Europe but always considered himself an American. Those three men were just astonishing what they were able to do. And there's a Russian named Ilya Repin who was amazing. Antonio Mancini, an Italian, was amazing. A Frenchman named Julien Bastien-Lepage, incredible artist. If any of your listeners, viewers want to check those guys out, I highly recommend it, see what I mean. But so then something happened. And what I believe happened, circling back to your point again, I think there's the rise of communism, the rise of statism, became very fashionable, especially in Europe. And this idea of elitism became anathema to these people. It was the common man that was great, not these, demigods making these pictures. So the artwork became fashionable with the leftist idea. The statist idea is the common man kind of thing. And this sort of more crude art is more real. It's more organic. It's truer. And it also had to do, I think, with flat out jealousy. There were very few human beings on Earth who could do what this small group of great artists could do. So the lesser beings, the charlatans, the art people who wanted to be artists that had no kind of skills like that. It was impossible for them to do that. They were incapable of it. Just changed the game. Just said, oh well, that's not real art. This is, and it became abstract. It became crude. Sorolla, the Spaniard whose work I just love to death. It's so damn good. Started to fall out of fashion with the rise of artists like Zaragoza who did these really kind of ugly, crude paintings. But he became, Sorolla kind of lost fashion because this new, crude, weird art was coming up. And, artists like that who couldn't do what the great ones could do just changed the game. And it became fashionable to do these more abstracted things. Even Picasso started out as a very good traditional painter. His early work was, I thought, quite good. And he kind of saw the writing on the wall. He's, a very cagey businessman. Jumped into this. It's like, oh, now we're going to do cubism. That became a kind of a fashionable thing for about a decade. And, you didn't have to know how to draw. You didn't have to know color. You didn't have to know anything. You just kind of do this wacky cubism. And then that morphed into even crazier abstract stuff that required very little craftsmanship. And it went along with sort of the rise of statism, and the idea that beauty is this elite thing that we need to get rid of. We need to, ugly is becoming more real. And I have a feeling that has to do with the idea that people, the leftist ideology, the leftist thought process is kind of anathema to beauty. It elevates people. It makes them think of a higher things than statism and the individual, and they don't like that. They don't like the idea that there's something bigger and more beautiful than them. Kind of goes back to that jealousy thing. I'm kind of wandering around in the woods here, but
No, it's interesting. I think it gets at spiritual stuff as well, right? You can tie
True.
that into, you look at the Christian narrative, right? I think that the narrative of, or the perspective of the fallen angels is envy of God, envy of something greater than themselves. And that taps into kind of the leftist ideology. It's a very low spiritual.
And the really great art kind of lifts you out of the self. It makes you think of something greater. It sort of has a window into the infinite. And, if you're a statist, the last thing you want is people thinking about something bigger than the state, more wonderful, more beautiful, more important to them than the state, which is, swings us around to, the real scary state, this communist state. If you weren't doing straight up propaganda, you weren't allowed to be an artist anymore. And a lot of the art became then a weapon. It was in those areas, especially the early Soviet era. There were lots of artists were straight up murdered. They were just considered, they didn't go along with the program, so they just got executed. The ones that were allowed to were basically doing pro-Soviet propaganda. The paintings were, the workers in the factories and, the farmers threshing the communal wheat, all this stuff. And it was, that was shown to people as, this is the ideal. Where, the state is supreme and, the workers are the wonders, and there was no elitism. It was just straight up propaganda.
I noticed it when I went to Russia. You see, first what landed in St. Petersburg, I see all the Tsarist stuff, like the Winter Palace and some of the old Tsarist buildings are beautiful. They're unbelievable, unbelievable art, unbelievable architecture. But the buildings around the city that the communists built are so dehumanizing and awful.
Yeah. They called it brutalist architecture.
Oh, imagine living there, what that does to you psychologically.
And it was meant to.
It's literally, the Bauhaus architecture and all that stuff was meant to dehumanize you and make you feel like you're just part of this utilitarian, gross system, right?
And you were supposed to be demoralized. Yuri Bezmenov talked about this as stages to bring about the communist end game, is to demoralize people. That's one of the stages of bringing this about. And, if you're seeing beautiful architecture and you're seeing beautiful art, you're not you're not demoralized, you're uplifted. And you don't turn to the state, you turn to something higher. And that's why those regimes did that. They wanted the populace demoralized so that they could be molded. And you do see that. That's East German architecture. that's some depressing stuff. But you look at the great cathedrals all through Europe. You look at the great architecture. Christopher Wren comes to mind, the English architect who did St. Paul's, and dozens of unbelievably beautiful buildings. When you see those kind of things, you don't get demoralized. You're not moldable. So a lot of those, like the Taliban, they destroy priceless artwork, like those Buddhist sculptures, blew those up. They don't want you to see beauty. They don't want it's not helping their cause for you to be thinking about something other than their cause.
Could you give some examples I'm not even going to say just the United States, but Europe, kind of the former Christian West, the United States, of, in the last couple of years, of horrible art that's meant to dehumanize people?
Well, a lot of it's just pure shock value. You look at, let's take Michelangelo's Pietà. This incredible craftsmanship, the idea, the execution. It's just, you see it and you can't believe what you're seeing. And it's an amazing piece of religious art. It's absolutely astounding. And then you take something like Serrano's Piss Christ, which is a crucifix in a jar of his own pee. And that's supposed to, that was a big deal, right? It was that's really powerful art, man. It makes you think. It's like, well, no, it's there just to shock you and to insult you and to, take something like the crucifixion and throw it in pee, make it meaningless. And that's kind of what you're dealing with now is just shock value. It's meant to just insult you, and there's no beauty in that. There's nothing uplifting in that. It's just in your face. Like it's a giant FU to what you believe in, and a higher thing. And there's tons of that going on.
Hugely in the music industry too. I mean, the music industry is trash right now.
Well, and yeah, I mean the genres now are it's crude. It insults women. It degrades people. The language, the imagery that it is. It's just degrading. I don't listen to it, but it's popular. A lot of people do. They enjoy songs about rape and insulting women and killing people, and it's like I find that really offensive, and I don't think that's the sign of a healthy society that embraces that. I think that's a society in decline, which is why I'd like to see more popular good art. In the circles I'm in, I see a great deal of very good art, visual art. There's still some magazines that use really real good illustration. They're fast fading, but the print media is fast fading. There really aren't a lot of printed materials anymore. Everything's gone digital, but there's still a market for it. It's people aren't taught anymore in schools about what would make great art. The same way they're not taught about their culture. They're taught about everything but their culture and their ancestry and Western culture and why that's why that's superior to so many other cultures. There's this false equivalency that all cultures are the same. They all are valuable, and they're all more or less alike. No, they're really not. There's a reason humanity is where it is straight out of Western culture. The Western culture kind of invented the modern world that everyone lives in, and it pretty much invented everything wonderful in it. No one likes to hear that because it goes against the narrative that everybody's the same and all cultures are equal, and that is just simply demonstrably not true. And you get kind of tamped down for pointing that out.
Do you think the education system, especially in the arts, through the, I don't even like to use the term public education, I like to use the term government or state education.
Yeah.
It's too far gone to fix at this point, in my opinion.
Well, it's not taught at all.
Yep.
It,
There's almost only subversive stuff that's taught through government
well,
institutions.
yeah, but
at this point.
even when I was in elementary school, I was public schooled mostly. I had a little private schooling, but we had art class. You had in elementary school, if it was an art class, which in my school you went to a separate teacher, the art teacher, and you had art class, and you were not only did the children do the art, you had projects and you did little things that you did, and glue the macaroni on there, stuff like that, popsicle stick stuff. But you were also taught about art. You got an art history, kind of rudimentary, but you got an art history lesson through elementary school. That's gone.
But even if it's there, I highly doubt they're focusing on great art.
No,
They're focusing on kind of subversive.
Yeah,
leftist.
my high school, all the art, you could take art classes there, but it was mostly elective, and I don't know if there's any art history at all. I highly doubt it. I think it's more of a art class where you go make a pot, or you go paint a picture, or you do a drawing, whatever. I didn't do any art classes in high school, but I know in my old high school they still have an art department. I don't know what they teach there, but it's just that is not taught anymore. And as far as I know, the civics classes that we used to all have, American history and civics, and I used to say the Pledge of Allegiance when I was in elementary school every morning. That's no longer happening. I'm certain of that. But there's basically just. I think it's intentional. I think the education in this country is purposely being kind of hollowed out because smart, informed people are hard to control. Well-educated, free-thinking people are hard to control, and this is the end game of this is statism. It's the state in control of the individual, and that's where we're headed. And I think just incrementally there we go. And the arts have become part of that. It's been made crude. It's been made to be degrading. It's been made to be demoralizing on the mainstream art that you're shown all the time. Artists that are elevated, of course, they all come out of New York. All the great artists the last 50 years, somehow, miraculously, are all out of New York. Occasionally you'll dig one up in Paris, but rarely London. But it's just incredible. That's like an artist friend of mine pointed out. Isn't it amazing? Like they never find a great artist somewhere in Nebraska. He's always in New York. And he meant that facetiously. It's a racket there. A few influential people who want to make a lot of money decide that whoever the artist is, doesn't matter who it is, they're going to make that guy great. So these influential people buy up their art for pennies. No one realizes that. But then the other people that come, they're buying this guy, I got to buy this guy. That's where the money comes in. and the critics write about how great this new artist is, and everybody has to have one. And the people who started it all resell theirs that they got for nothing for the millions. It's a racket.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with art. It's a business.
Propaganda
business.
and business.
But if you can get this artist to layer on the insulting and the shocking and the Serrano's piss Christ and what was that woman's name? Karen Finley was got huge name for herself by, basically just rubbing chocolate all over herself, in a setting, rolling around in pee. It's just disgusting.
It's depraved.
Yeah, she became very famous.
So I truly believe the modern left is almost demonically, diabolically influenced. It goes, the level of perversion and self-hatred goes beyond a political lens. It's almost as if some of these people hate humanity itself. They're guided by a dark spiritual force, a demonic force, if you will. Why is this? Why is it that the left seems to hate humanity and cause so much destruction through their cultural influence, through their economic influence, while the quote-unquote conservative traditionalists that seem to like beauty and seem to enjoy life and understand the human condition and its limitations and appreciate what it is? Like, why is that?
Well, I have an idea. I have an idea about this. I think most people on the left, especially, I've met them, just hate things the way they are. The way things are and the way things have been, they just hate it. And I think a lot of that comes from self-loathing. Whatever their personality flaws are, their upbringing, something happened to them. They were damaged somewhere, somehow. And their self-loathing they project onto the world, and they do not like the world as it is, which is why they call themselves progressives. We're going to progress from this state to a better state. And the root of conservatism is we want to conserve this. We don't dislike the way things are. We're proud of our Western culture. We're happy with the world that Western culture has built, and the amazing abundance we have through individualism, like letting people run their own lives, is an enormous creative fountain. It's created the modern world and everything wonderful in it. And I think the leftist mentality that doesn't like the way things are, it's just the way all the things we around us in our culture and everything we see, it's just bad. They don't like it. Rooted in my opinion, some sort of self-loathing. And you can see this manifest itself in the degrading and the destruction of their own beauty, their own human bodies. They pierce, they mutilate themselves, they dye their hair, crazy weird color. They cut it so they uglify themselves. You see these beautiful women pierced all over their faces and tattooed all over themselves, and I just shake my head at it. They defile this this godly image. They've not only turned their backs on God that way, but God had made man in his image. They're defiling themselves. And I believe that comes from a place of self-loathing. I don't know too many people of the right, I'll call them. I won't call them conservatives, because there's a lot of people who are on the right who would not call themselves.
Well, there's less to conserve now, right? They've caused so much damage. There's less things to actually conserve.
Well, there's a certain amount of that. I mean, the label conservative was to conserve what we have. I mean, to Buckley's famous line is that a conservative is someone who's standing athwart history yelling "stop." we're being fed this idea that progressivism is a good thing. This progress into statism is somehow good and right. And you don't have to be much of a history buff to know that that's a really false idea. No statist state, country idea has ever done anything but fail. And it usually fails spectacularly with horrible deprivation, murder, mass murder, torture, the degradation of the individual. It always ends the same way. There's never been this statist utopia that started out and became this flowering thing we should all emulate. It all ends in flames and destruction and death. And no one can argue that. All they can argue is, well, we didn't do it right that time, but eventually we're going to get this right. And in the meantime, we have to kill several million people to get it right. But hey, that's kind of the mentality these people have. But we're talking about the art part. It's the people who will mutilate their own bodies and uglify themselves are not going to appreciate beautiful art. They're going to be attracted to banal art or actual ugly art because it reflects them. It reflects their aesthetic, which is why you see fewer and fewer, I think, art galleries. My art gallery here in Charleston is the Sportsman's Gallery. You and I stopped in there a couple of days ago. It's filled with really beautiful stuff. I particularly liked Seamus. Some artist that I don't know painted a squirrel, and I kind of laughed. And suddenly, I've never felt the urge to paint a squirrel, but now that I've seen that wonderful painting of a squirrel, I kind of feel like maybe I'd like to try painting a squirrel because I've never done it. But the art and beauty is kind of in the eye of the beholder, and if your own aesthetic is to see beauty and recognize really beautiful things, you're more inclined to want to make it yourself, want to emulate it, want to seek it out. And if ugliness is your aesthetic and self-loathing, you're much more likely to seek that out. And so conservative art, in my opinion, they seek beauty, they seek tradition, they seek an aesthetic that's 500 years old, from Renaissance, Rembrandt's, Vermeer's, beautiful, recognized beautiful art. And of course people recognize it's beautiful. We build huge museums to put it in so we can look at it. But the ugliness now is starting to take over, especially in Western culture.
Look at the music and the culture, right? Like, I hate to draw a bit of a crude caricature, but when I think of the leftist culture, I think of the damage that's been done to Colorado with this kind of infiltration of the drug and hood culture with the legalization of marijuana and the introduction of the EDM culture, of these just festivals with bad music, with people being hyper promiscuous, drugged out of their minds, similar to almost Huxley's Brave New World, where they're all drugged out on soma and having orgies and stuff, and they're controlled by, base, meaningless impulses, right? And that's what I think of when I think of the leftist culture. There really is not much culture to it. Philosophically, they completely deny God and religion, and it's just this almost satanic, at the worst elements, satanic, self-hating thing, or putting people on a pedestal of godhood, that they're capable of everything, searching in the self for meaning in God, rather than something higher than themselves.
And
right?
when you search yourself, you're going to find sin. People are often good, but turn people loose to just pursue their own base interests, and it turns ugly fast.
Without chasing the divine, when it's all about me.
Yeah.
Right? That's what the fallen angels did. They made themselves gods. Without chasing the divine without a connection to God. We are nothing, right? We are,
Well, or
we are
you
decaying.
just you degrade into the warlocks. I mean, you turn into basically just animals.
Yeah.
If you chase your innermost desires, pretty soon you're murdering people, and you've just become a homicidal maniac. I noticed it in Denver. Since the pot's been legalized, and recently, basically everything's been legalized now. I mean, you really
You're not going to get in that much trouble most
no,
of the time.
and you're not going to get arrested. Like if someone sees you high on LSD or something, or even taking LSD,
Or meth or
you're
heroin.
not. Yeah, meth. You're not going to be arrested. And I saw a little news clip. This was maybe a year ago, Denver local news, and they're kind of man on the street thing, and they interviewed some homeless woman, and it's like, what's your day like? I said, well, they pay us $600 a month. You get a free phone. You get a tent. This is the state giving you this stuff. And she said, well, it's great. All you have to do is go find the pot store or go find some meth with the money they gave you, and you just stay high all day. And she thought that was great.
And there's this veneer that they pretend to care about these people, right? That if you really care about these people, you'll let them live in squalor, you'll let them be addicted to drugs, you'll hand them more money.
Well, that's
to retain this.
It all comes back to money. So the more homeless people you have, the bigger homeless problem you have. We got to throw some more money at that.
And they're skimming off the top.
It's a giant scam. More homeless that's why they are so happy to have this huge homeless population, and basically why they're paying people to be bums. If you pay someone to be a bum, you'll get a lot of takers. It's actually a pretty good living. $600 a month, your own tent, and your own cell phone that you don't pay for. All the bums have cell phones. Did you hear what I said? Cell phones.
Yeah, it's so degrading, and it's causing so much destruction out west. These cities that were once great are just completely imploding right now.
Oh, downtown.
And there's this. I noticed it in parts of Europe that were once great. There's this kind of socialist envy of anyone that's successful.
Yeah,
it's like there's this hatred of anyone that builds anything great. All of a sudden, the guys that are creating business, creating wealth, are vilified to the point where no one's doing that. Everyone's the state's bitch.
Well, it's a lot like my first sort of observation about when art got so good. A small group of people got so good at this that the jealousy of the other ones, they basically tore it down. It's kind of happening culturally, is that if, as you were just saying, if you're someone who's successful, you're good at what you do, you build your business, you become an excellent doctor, you're going to have a lot of mediocres jealous of that and try to take you down because they can't do that, and it bothers them. It reflects poorly on them that they're not you, they're not successful. Therefore, I'm not successful not because of me, but because of the system. And we got to take the system down because it won't allow me, the wonderful me, to be successful.
So I guess that would be a good transition to our next question. What do you think of Bob Ross? Like, was he good for the arts? Was he bad for the arts? Was he a man of destruction? Was he a man of beauty? What was he?
I think Bob Ross was an absolute raging genius, but not as an artist. He was a first-class marketeer. He had this idea and this way to make these goofy little paintings that started out on PBS, and all these little old ladies would follow along with Bob Ross products. And Bob Ross would show you how to paint a painting in 20 minutes, and the only way to do it was with Bob Ross painting supplies. And Bob Ross made a hell of a lot of money. I read somewhere that it was $15 million a year. Basically being a online art supply dealer. But Bob Ross as an artist was humorous. He was not an artist, but he was one heck of a carnival barker.
Nice. Never heard it put that way before.
He was an excellent carnival barker.
So a lot of your art's been influenced by your love for the outdoors, your love for wildlife, your love for hunting, experiencing the outdoors,
Yes.
sporting culture, which is a great way to get in touch with nature, and in my opinion, a great way to get in touch with the divine, what's
Yeah.
been created and stuff.
I
How are the great artists influenced by, something deeper, their deeper hobbies, or like how does
Well,
that show across the board?
So I'm not really sure, other than the fact that I'll be out doing something and I'll be struck by something that I see, and I want to paint it. And as an artist, you stop yourself and go, why was that interesting to me? Why did I suddenly see something that kind of shook me, and now I want to paint that? What was the thing that got me interested in that? And that's what tends to make great art. If you can figure out what it is that made you interested in that, if you can make that, whatever that is that you saw and wanted to reproduce, interesting to other people, now you've become a communicator. You're expressing an idea or an emotion. You're conveying an idea or an emotion that hopefully is universal. That someone who would never turn and want to stare at a blue car parked under a tree. I'm just inventing something out of my head. I wouldn't necessarily paint a blue car under a tree, but if that suddenly shocked you and you can figure out why that was very emotionally interesting to you, and then are able to convey that to the point where someone else who would never look at a blue car under a tree go, whoa, that's really interesting to me. It's kind of with my sporting art. I do a great deal more subject matter than sporting art, but we're here in Charleston, visited my gallery here, and I do give them sporting art. It's the hunting and fishing and wildlife. And, when I'm out hunting in the woods, if I'm running around after elk or I'm running around after deer or whatever it is I'm hunting, there'll be moments where you just look around and the whole landscape will just be this unbelievably moving, striking thing. And I get a lot of ideas and inspiration while I'm in the field, just because there's something about coming up over a pine ridge somewhere in the high Rockies, chasing after some elk you can hear, and there's a little opening in the trees on top of this ridge, and there's these spectacular mountains and vista, and the sunlight bouncing off golden aspen trees, and the smells, and this whole thing that happens to you, where you're just, you're transported. You're transported out of the moment. You do think it may be not God if you're not if that isn't what interests you, or if you're not particularly religiously motivated, something happened to you. I think of God all the time whenever I'm out in His creation. It's stunning. If a flat wheat field that's got pheasants in it, it just suddenly becomes this striking landscape of horizon and sky and sun, and especially if pheasant flushes out there in front of you, it's just you almost don't want to do anything but just watch it happen, because it's spectacular.
So you've sold a lot of art too.
Yes.
You've been in the art world a long time. Psychologically, what can you tell about when people are commissioning art or whatever? What can you tell about people by the type of art they're collecting? What can you tell about people psychologically, spiritually, passion-wise by the type of art that they gather in their house?
Well,
pay money for?
As you would certainly guess, I mean, people who buy my artwork, who are attracted to what I do, tend to be traditional conservative people. they and I've when I've seen their homes, they're very tasteful. I'm trying not to pat myself on the back to be included in these tasteful people's lives with my tasteful art. But they tend to have their homes are beautiful. Their furnishings tend to be tasteful and aesthetically pleasing, and the art they choose is always traditional. I rarely see my work hanging in someone's home that has very abstract artwork as well. It all tends to be realism. I'll argue that the art I do is completely abstract because that's not a real landscape. That's a description of a landscape, which by definition is an abstraction. But I don't try to be a camera with it either. I try to bring my own aesthetic to it, bring my own craftsmanship to it. I don't want it to look like a photograph. I want it to look like a painting. I want people to see the surface texture with the paint sticking out and what I did and the brush strokes and the palette knife strokes. And so the painting, it becomes even more pleasing aesthetically from just the imagery, but then there's this other layer of beauty of the paint texture, the surface, so you can keep going back to it. You're going to own my painting till you die, hopefully. And so you may own it for 40 or 50 years. And I like the idea of little surprises that someone who hasn't looked at the painting they bought from me for a while, and they go up and they see something they didn't see before. And then the next time they do that, they see something else, and there's always some little thing that they get.
So going down the rabbit hole a little bit with this next question,
I think we're already down the hole.
We're going further down the rabbit hole to the thought leaders of destruction in our culture.
Yes.
Did you ever see the art the Podesta brothers collected? Did you see some of the pictures of the art that they had collected in their house?
Yeah.
It was disturbing. And I look at John Podesta, I look at his actions. He's been this and the Podesta group, and it's this massive
frightening
force for evil, right? And he's
surrounded by it.
Well, yeah, we're going to get into that. So
surrounded by evil imagery.
It was serial killer imagery. At the Jeffrey Dahmer statue of the pose.
Demons.
He had art that hinted at pedophilia. All these kids.
Oh, for sure.
Really strange, like BDSM stuff with children. His whole art collection was deeply perverse and violent and crude and
yeah, it exudes evil.
Exudes evil. But then you look at the actions of this man with his leaked emails, leading to subversion of the church with the emails about the Catholic Spring and infiltrating all these Catholic nonprofits and the chaos him and his brother have created through their consulting group in D.C. Do you think sometimes you can tell by the type of art that people are collecting that what they're motivated by?
Oh, for sure.
100%.
Oh, for sure. It's
a telling sign of values.
Yeah, it's like piercing yourself, and it's like dyeing your hair purple, and covering your face with tattoos, and it's telling people who you are, what you are.
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing any of say Jeffrey Epstein's art, except the one painting of Bill Clinton in a blue dress and high heels on.
Yeah, very telling. Very telling.
That was really telling.
Yeah.
But whenever I've seen photographs of him in his various dwellings, it's usually a close up. I haven't really been able to see much background to assess that, but I've seen the Bill Clinton in the blue dress painting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it would be interesting to go into someone's house that you knew was not a good person and see what's in there and see what they have around.
Well, do you think that you can tell cultural movements based on what's the type of music you're listening to? Fashion is a way to tell how people carry themselves. Reading? What books do you read? What music do you like?
Yeah.
How do you dress? How do you carry yourself?
Yeah.
What kind of art do you have? Is that telling of a movement or an ideology or group of people. Yeah.
Well, and you meet new friends, or meet people, and they eventually maybe invite you over to dinner, and I'm usually pleased. I like these people enough to go have dinner at their house that I've met, and I'm inside their home. I'm definitely looking around. What's their taste? Is your taste? What am I seeing? And they generally, there's nothing in there. I go, oh, I must have read you wrong. This is John Podesta's house.
Yeah.
But pretty much 100% of the time, it's very aesthetically tasteful, and those are the kind of people I want to hang around with.
Closing out, what advice would you give to this next generation of creatives to have a positive impact while this country seems to be going through a tough time and heading into tougher times? Can art and the type of art they support and buy be used as like a form of resistance or cultural preservation? Like what advice would you have for our viewers?
Well, I wouldn't. That's an interesting idea. As a force for good, I think there's always going to be a human desire, even if the culture's crap, for beauty. That won't die. I wonder about the younger generation coming up. I mean, art, to a lot of these young people, they wouldn't even think about it. It's not something anywhere in their radar. And hopefully as they get older, their tastes become more sophisticated, such like that. And you do see, when we were in my art gallery, there were some younger people in there that wandered in. They weren't young, but it's just nice to see somebody walking down a street, glances into an art gallery, and is interested enough to at least go in and look around in there.
Good point.
So my hope would be that basic human desire, I mean, we're humans, we don't change. There's enough people out there that seek beauty and wish for beauty and do think of higher powers. They think of outside themselves. They think of something greater than themselves. Hopefully those people make their wishes known and make their wishes what they're seeing, this clear destruction, calculated destruction of our culture, stand athwart history and yell stop. I don't want to see any more of this ugliness. I won't support it. I won't listen to music that degrades women. I won't look at things that are ugly anymore. I want to see things that are beautiful.
Awesome.
And it'll be I think they'll have to, in a lot of ways, vote with their wallets, just not support that anymore, or not allow it in their lives anymore. And it'll become, hopefully enough people will turn away from that it will fade. The problem there we have is that, as you and I discussed, driving around and we were fishing, there's this giant psyop going on, where almost everything you see isn't real. Supposedly the whole country hates Donald Trump, but they don't. Supposedly we want more statism. We want more of the state in our life. I don't actually think that's true. I think most people are resentful of that, but as we saw in the COVID thing, the PSYOP scared enough people that you put your mask on, even though you didn't want to. And a lot of people went and got this injection that was never tested. I refused to wear a mask, and I refused to take that injection, for the simple reason that I just didn't believe these people. I'm a skeptic at heart anyway, but I tend to see the PSYOP going on all the time, and a lot of people don't, and that's disappointing to me, that not enough people are skeptical of what they're being fed and what they're being shown. And when you turn on your television set, or you listen to the radio, you're being fed a narrative that people who want to control you are feeding you. And they were able to use this. Basically, the COVID was the flu. It had the same case fatality rate as a mild flu year. And we can go down that rabbit hole for another 5 hours if we want to talk about COVID. But the main takeaway with that is the overall death rate in the 2 years that we were locked down and controlled stayed exactly the same statistically as the previous 5 years. So if you're going to argue this was a deadly pandemic, the numbers don't show that. There was not a big spike in deaths that you would expect from the normal yearly amount of dead people, which is around 2.4 million people die every year. You would expect to see a huge spike, and that never happened for overall death. So that's part of the psyop that we're fed all the time. And, hopefully the people will resist this psyop and say, I refuse to look at ugliness anymore. I don't want to see homeless bums everywhere in tents. We have to stop this. We're paying people to do this. We're paying people to be alcoholic bums. It's degrading for them. That's not a human way to live. You're not helping these people. You're basically degrading them, debasing them. You're not allowing them to live a human life. You're paying them to just be a parasite. It's awful. And it's calculated. Hopefully people will finally just say enough. I don't want to see any more huge chunks of street full of bums and tents doing drugs. I don't want to see that anymore. And either you move out of the city or you pressure your city council to just don't pay them any more money, roust them out, say you can't live here anymore. You have to go live somewhere else, but you can't live here because we don't want to put up with that.
So, Kent, we were talking the other day. I mean, we've grown up hunting together. I've been on probably over 10 hunts with you, if not more, since I was a little kid. And one of my favorite hunting stories you've got is getting chased by the grizzly bear in Alaska. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, that was fun. I was hunting caribou with a bow, and I did carry a semi-automatic rifle for bears. And I ended up seeing 11 grizzly bears on that trip, from a distance. But I found a place where caribou were having to pass through this little skinny opening on their migration through a bunch of bushes that went kind of the whole length of this hillside, big barren hillside with all these willow bushes and alder bushes and then a 10 or 15 foot gap. And every caribou I could see through my binoculars had to go through that gap, and I thought, oh my God, this is just shooting fish in a barrel. I'll just set up to kill one there with my bow, and as soon as they walk through that gap, I'll arrow one, and easy peasy. So anyway, it takes me about half an hour to walk down the hill to the bottom of the valley and up to that gap, and it was rainy, and I took my backpack off that had my gun in kind of a holster in it. And I left my bow there because I was going to pace off. I figured out a spot that the caribou wouldn't see me right away as they came through this gap, and I'd have like a perfect broadside arrow shot from about who knows how many yards. That's why I left my stuff there, and I walked up the side of these bushes to the gap to pace it off so I would know the distance where I could shoot it. And I want it to be between 20 and 30 yards. That's I'm effective bow hunter from that range. And so anyway, I walk up to this gap and pace it off. It's about 23, 24 paces, and something catches my eye. And I look down the other side of these bushes, and here's this grizzly bear that's about 50 yards away, as I walk through, it sees me and immediately charges up the hill at me at 100 miles an hour. And I had just enough time to kind of duck back around the bushes and then jump into the bushes. And I kind of ran down, 15, 20 yards through the bushes and held still. And I'm not really scared at all. I just like, oh, that damn grizzly bear, I better get away from him. And anyway, I start to think, oh crap, man, he's probably sniffing around. He's going to find my backpack full of candy bars and stuff to eat. And that's where my gun and my weapon is. So I kind of make this decision not to hang out there because I didn't want to get eaten. And I ended up going down to the bottom of the hill and waiting 2 or 3 hours and snuck back up, and he was long gone. Anyway, long story long, I killed a caribou, not there, but nearby the next morning. And I cut it up, skinned it out, wanted to take the antlers and the hide and pack it all on my back. And I'm walking out, and I bump into 2 hunters. And we get chatting a little bit. It turns out they're from Aurora, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. It's kind of right where I live. As they start talking, they go, "Hey, are you the guy that got chased by the bear yesterday?" And I'm like, "How the hell did you know that?" He said, "Oh, yeah, we watched the whole thing through binoculars and said, yeah, that guy's going to die." So at least if I'd gotten eaten by that grizzly bear, my family would know what happened to me.
That's great.
The grizzly bear story.
So we're out fishing for reds yesterday and talking about, we grew up fishing together in Nantucket a bunch, surf casting and stuff.
Yep.
And talking about the guys that got their finger chopped off fishing blues. That's a good story.
So, okay, real quick story there. There's a great fishery on Nantucket that's called Great Point. It's a big spit of sand that comes off the island, and the 2 bodies of water run together. It's a super fishery. There's all kinds of fish in the rip there. And anyway, me and my brother-in-law and nephews, and maybe one of my younger kids, you couldn't drive out because of the sand plovers. They shut the point off when they're nesting, so you don't run over the poults or run over their eggs. They nest on the ground, so you have to walk out. So we piled out our beer and our waders and our fishing gear and slogged a mile and a half over the sand out to the point, and there's a bluefish blitz going on. That means there's just a huge school of bluefish chomping bait going crazy, and they're flying out of the water, and pretty much anything you throw in there, they'll eat. So, we all drop whatever we're doing, run over to the beach and start catching fish. And these 2 German kids from Germany who've never surf fished before came up behind us. They weren't with us, but we'd been fishing 15 or 20 minutes, and they came up. And these kids all had rental stuff. They had rental rods and kind of watching us do it. And, I didn't think about it, but I need to explain something about bluefish for whoever's never fished for them. They're basically saltwater piranhas. They're like a 10-pound, 12-pound piranha. They have razor-sharp, interlocking triangular teeth. Their mouths look just like a piranha. And you have to use wire leader or heavy mono leader, or they'll just chew through the line. They're voracious predators. Anyway, when you catch one, you need a pair of pliers or de-hookers because you don't want to get your hands anywhere near the piranha mouth. So the story goes, the German kid catches his first fish, and we're all kind of congratulating, yay, and I wasn't thinking. And this kid pulls the fish up on the beach, and he uses his hands to try to take the hook out of this piranha's mouth, and it chomped down on his index finger. And, the shock and pain, he yanked his finger out of that piranha's closed jaws, and all the skin on the end of his finger was off, and it was just bone. And so the one bluefish this guy caught got most of the tip of his index finger, and they immediately turned around and had to go back to the hospital and probably have the tip of his index finger amputated. So I don't know.
What do you think the coldest day you've had hunting out west was?
That's easy. I hunted elk. I was guiding a Russian artist friend of mine, Eugene Dobos, a million Gene Dobos stories, but outside of Taos, I didn't buy a license, but I brought the guns, and my buddy and his son, who'd never hunted elk, wanted me to, come guide him. He said, "I know there's elk on this mountain. I've seen them." And I said, "Great." So we took his truck. It was an old covered, like a canvas covered back service truck, like an army truck. And, he filled it full of like padding and brought our sleeping bags, and we were going to, camp out. Well, it turned out to be 21 below zero that night, maybe 23, probably a 30-mile-an-hour wind. And so we got up in the next morning. It was snowing and 23 below zero. And thank God, we wandered over to this arroyo that comes up out of the valley. My idea was that all the elk will get filtered in there because it's out of the wind, and they'll want to come up out of that windswept valley. And sure enough, man, I glassing down in there, and about 2 miles away are a couple of bull elk, and we got 2 rifles, 2 guys, and 2 licenses, and then 2 bulls. And the bulls come up, and I'm waiting for them to pop out, and sure enough, here they are. They finally walk up out of this arroyo, and the 2 guys I'm with, I'm in between them, and I'm looking through my binoculars. I don't want to move. The elk are probably 80 yards away, and they're kind of looking around, and I whisper, it's like, do you guys see this? And they're like, yeah. It's like, do you see this? It's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, you should shoot. So the kid that has my big rifle shoots the big one, and he absolutely drilled it. I mean, it went stiff-legged and fell over like a wooden horse. And my artist buddy, the Russian Gene Dobos, shoots. I have a smaller caliber rifle, and the other elk turns and runs off. And I said, well, do you think you got him? Because the other one's laying there, he didn't move. He just flopped over, literally like a wooden horse. And he goes, yeah, I'm sure I got him. So anyway, long story longer, it's freezing cold. This guy doesn't have, he got blown up in the Second World War, so he can't gut this elk up. And his kid's never done it. So I said, well, let me go see if I can find the one that ran and see if you hit it. And thank God it had been snowing. There was, snowing. And not too windy at that point, but still 21 below. Anyway, I almost quit. I followed these elk tracks maybe 800 yards and didn't see a drop of blood anywhere. And I figured he just flat missed it. And right when I was about to quit, because it was so damn cold, I saw a drop of blood on the snow, one little drop. So I kept going, and about 100 more yards, it was just deader than hell. And that was the only drop of blood. Anyway, I spent the next 2 hours
freezing your balls off.
Freezing, because they don't know how to do it.
So the elk.
I cut up 2 elk in 2 hours and 21 below zero, and the only thing that saved me is I could stick my frozen hands inside this still warm elk gut pile and warm my hands up. And we ended up pulling those 2 elk into that truck and drove home and got drunk when we got home.
That's awesome.
That's the coldest I ever was.
What was the other elk hunting story that you had when you were calling them in that we were talking about the other day?
So we had, my brother-in-law and I had split up because we were hearing bulls everywhere, and we thought we'd have a better chance if we each went after a separate one rather than try to tag team just one. So anyway, I'm hearing these calls down in the trees, and I start making some cow calls and some little squeaky bull calls, and here come 2 bulls. But they're little young spiky bulls. They're not, I'm not going to shoot one of those. They're little yearling, like 2.5-year-old bulls. And anyway, I'm kind of thinking, well, this is cool. I at least call them up to me and I can, check them out. It'll be fun. And so I keep making my little call, and they're interested, and they keep coming up, and they're sneaking up the trail, and all of a sudden they stop, and their ears prick up. And then they turn tail and just sprint back where they came from. And I'm like, and the wind was perfect. It was blowing. They didn't smell me. And I'm trying to think, I didn't move. I'm in a nice hidey place right in front of this bush in full camouflage gear. And so it's like, well, they didn't smell me. I didn't make a sound. I didn't move. And anyway, it's like, I don't know, maybe they just got freaked out and they didn't see a bull or didn't see what was supposed to be there, and they freaked out. Anyway, I stood up from my little bush that I was squatting in front of, And right behind me is a massive bull elk that I never heard came in, was on the other side of the bush. And when I stood up, it freaked out. I freaked out. It ran the other way, and I ran the other way. Both of us probably making some screaming noises. But I had called in the huge giant bull, and that's why the two little bulls turned and ran, because they saw this huge bull. It's like, oh, he's going to kill us. And anyway, that was one of many. I was maybe 4 feet from that bull.
How many times have you been gator hunting with your cousins or Amy's cousins down in Florida?
We used to. There was a guy who was the dad of a gal that one of my nephews was dating. A guy named Malcolm Lavender, wonderful man. Sadly, he was killed in a plane crash coming back from a deer hunt. They decided they needed to get back, and they decided to fly through a North Texas thunderstorm, and it tore their plane apart, and they all died. But Malcolm used to have this airboat, and he managed this big cattle ranch near Cocoa, Florida. And he would get these gator permits, and he'd say, Kent, you want to go shoot your gator? It's like, hell yeah, I want to go shoot a gator. And anyway, we would get these permits and go out on the airboats, and first one I ever shot was a big one, and they sink when you shoot them. And it was in the St. Johns River. And anyway, we take the airboat out to kind of where he thought it went down, and he's got this. You fish around on the bottom with this big pole with a big hook on the bottom of it, and you kind of hook around on it until you hook it in somewhere, and then you pull it up where you can get it in the boat. And anyway, this thing sunk, and it probably took a half an hour. We thought it maybe didn't get killed. It just got wounded and swam away somewhere to die, and we couldn't find it. Anyway, Malcolm hooks this thing, and I found him and we get him up to the boat. He's got the back leg and the tail, and when they're shot like that through the head, they're still moving around. It's really weird. They're dead, but they're moving. And I'm like, he said, just grab that front leg and we'll roll him into the boat. And this was probably easily a 10-foot gator. It might have been a little better than that. Anyway, I grabbed the front foot. He's got the back legs, and we're trying to pull this thing in, and it wasn't dead. It swung that huge head around and chomped onto the side of the boat. And I'm like, I let go like, holy shit, that could have been my arm. And Malcolm's, I'm the gun's near me, and he's, give me the gun, give me the gun, give me the gun. And it's a .22 Hornet, and he grabs that gun and blasts it in the head a few times. And anyway, we finally get this still writhing around gator in the boat, and he says, you want to go to Burger King, get some food? I go, yeah, I'm starving. So we were trailering his airboat behind his truck, go through the drive-thru at the Burger King, and there's a black gal who's taking the orders at the Burger King. Anyway, it's kind of Florida. This is Florida redneck story. We place our order and drive to the next window, and all you hear is this ear-piercing scream as this gal sees this still writhing around massive alligator still kind of moving around in the back of the airboat. And she scared the crap out of her. And Malcolm, he's a funny guy. He caught a little alligator, maybe 3 feet long, when my kids were there, and I was off doing something. I think we were hog hunting at the time, and maybe I was out chasing after a hog. And anyway, we get back to the truck, and I see my kids. They're sitting back there. That kind of Cheshire grin, smiles on their faces. I'm not thinking one way or the other. Malcolm said, "Hey, Ken, would you do me a favor and grab a hammer out of my toolbox there in the back of the truck?" And of course, I open the truck, and there's this 3-foot gator in there, like snapping around, like big funny joke. And my kids still tell that story about.
That's awesome.
Malcolm scaring dad with the 3 or 4 foot gator.
That's so good.
Anyway, we could do this all day.
Where can people hear more about your work and what you're doing and support?
Well, thank you. I have a website, kentlemon.com, that has stuff on it. You can Google my name. That will show you all the galleries that I show in. you can contact me through the galleries if anybody's interested in seeing work or getting commissioned stuff. But I've got galleries around the country that you can be found on the internet, and I have an Instagram page called Kent Lemon Artist, and it's pretty much just my art, a little bit of my dog, because I really like my dog, and some outdoor stuff, some fishing, some hunting stuff. You know, if I catch a big fish, I'll put a picture of it on there kind of as a hero shot, you know, go brag a little bit. But yeah, pretty much I can be found extensively on the internet. And if you take Gray's Sporting Journal, I'm not in every issue, but I'm in plenty of them. So
Wonderful. Well, thanks for being with us today, man. This was great.
Oh, Seamus, what a pleasure. It's always fun to hang out and chat with an old friend, too.